This is Michael Popok, Legal AF, somewhere on the road. You've heard about the fraud case of the century against Donald Trump that's already through most of week one, Donald Trump having appeared just 3 days of it, but you haven't heard it from the perspective of somebody like my co-anchor on Legal AF, Karen Friedman Agnifilo. We were batting around the ball about the first 3 days and things that she observed with her keen eye, spending 30 years as a prosecutor and me 30 years as a defense lawyer. And we set up a dialogue. We usually agree. Sometimes we don't. But when we don't, that's where the magic happens. And you'll appreciate it. I hope on our last episode of Legal AF, we got up to our elbows again about Judge Engoron having had enough, slamming his hand on the table, cutting off witnesses that were boring him, cutting off attorneys always for Donald Trump that he thought were taking advantage of the opportunity and acting like there was a jury present when there was no jury present, just a judge deciding things as they get down to the remaining 6 major fraud claims that the Office of Attorney General has against Donald Trump, his family, and all of his organizations. And I want you to hear it right from our most recent episode. Take a listen. So I think we're ready to jump in with the fraud case of the century. Donald Trump, look at that photo. Donald Trump, Salty, warn me before you put that up, will you? That was heart-stopping. Picture of Donald Trump staring at his Fisher-Price Play School computer monitor there in the courtroom at 60 Center Street, a place where Karen, you and I have spent a lot of time in our career at the trial. A nice little courtroom there that we're showing with Alina Hobb on one side and Chris Keiss on the other, and some other lawyers for Donald Trump. We never thought it would come. It's hard to believe that it was just about 13 months ago that Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, actually filed the suit. And within a year, she got not only a filing, she got a judgment last Tuesday in her favor. Some people who are tuning in late or don't follow us regularly might be thinking, well, if she got a ruling in her favor, finding persistent fraud in the operation of Donald Trump's business affairs, why are we having a trial? Because it was a multi-count complaint that was filed. The first count under 63-12 of the executive law, very powerful statute. I've talked about it at length over the last year. Probably the most powerful set of remedies and law that any attorney general has in our 50 states is held by the occupant of the New York Attorney General seat. And she's used it. It goes after persistent fraud. And the first count doesn't even require a finding of intent that Donald Trump or the others intended the fraud. It's just that it is a fraud and has misled the marketplace and the public, which is the ultimate victim here. That's why all the money, if she's successful, whether it's 250 million, 500 million, $1 billion, whatever the final number is that she asked for, it goes back to the people of the state of New York because of the fraud has been perpetuated on them. We in New York don't like fraudulent businesses, fraudulent business records, fraudulent financial statements, fraudulent insurance conduct in the way we operate our businesses. I'm sure most states would feel the same, but New York, it considers itself a business capital and takes this kind of thing seriously. So she got a huge victory, the Attorney General, the OAG, the Office of Attorney General, last week on summary judgment on her first claim, the claim that he could rule on because it didn't require any kind of finding of intent. And they've now run off the Trumpers, I think late. I think they should have done it like a minute after he entered that order, but they filed their notice of appeal today, but they didn't ask for a stay and didn't ask for an injunction. And there's a clock ticking because...
Right. So what happens if they're in the middle of the trial? What happens if
nothing?
If in the middle of the trial it gets reversed, or if there's a
nothing?
What do you mean?
Well, all right. So finish your thought, and then I'll tell you what I think happens.
No, it's just weird to be in this posture that he's appealing. There's a motion for summary judgment as to count 1, and he's now appealing that. But they're on trial for not only the same set of facts, but also the disgorgement of profits for count 1. So what happens if for some reason it gets overturned on appeal? What happens, A, in the middle of the trial, and B, what happens if he's found guilty and the trial's over?
Yeah. Okay. So let me see if I can explain it. Most states do not allow an appeal without asking permission first from the appellate court at this juncture in a case. But New York is not one of those states. States like Florida, for instance, if you get a summary judgment, partial summary judgment against you, you got to wait till the end of the trial, end of the case in order to appeal. You can't generally take what's called an interlocutory appeal. But New York allows appeals all the time. I mean, you don't like a discovery ruling by your judge, take an appeal. You don't like a summary judgment, as we just said, take an appeal. There's so many, I mean, you're always going, if you practice in Manhattan the way you and I do, you're always going to the First Department Appellate Division for an appeal on something that's not the final conclusive order of the court. This is the way I think it would work. He's taken his appeal on the first count of 6 counts and on 2 of 9 remedies that the OAG is seeking. One, she wanted a monitor or a receiver appointed, and she wanted his and all of his companies' business, not licenses, but certificates to operate in New York, to be dissolved. Judge granted those on summary judgment and ordered for their immediate dissolution with a receiver within 10 days, which is why there's a clock ticking. But the rest of the case, disgorgement, the amount of money that the judge is going to order be returned based on either count 1 or the remaining 6 counts, is for the trial. What's on trial right now, as the judge likes to remind the participants in the trial, I mean the Trump side, I'm not here to talk about what I ruled on last Tuesday. You got an issue with last Tuesday, you take it up to the appellate court. I'm here on counts 2 through 6 and remedies 3 through 9. I'm not here about what happened last week. Now, what that means is the following. If the appeal is going to take 6 to 8 or 9 months, this trial is going to be 3 to 5 months. I doubt there's going to be an appellate decision while this is still in trial. Could be, could happen. But as you can see, Karen, from prior appellate division rulings in this case, they're not bending over backwards to move on an emergency basis for Donald J. Trump. There's currently pending with the appellate division, and nobody's talked about it recently because they're not doing anything with it, a Article 78 petition by Donald Trump to sue the judge to force him to slow down on the summary judgment. Too late. He already ruled. And to abide by the orders of the appellate division, which is a ridiculous grounds to try to sue your judge. That's just been sitting there with the appellate division. They haven't set a briefing schedule. They haven't assigned judges to it. It's just sitting there. They denied last week, 2 days after the judge ruled on summary judgment, they denied the earlier attempt to stay the case and let the trial start on Monday. So the appellate division is giving no favors to Donald Trump. I don't think they're going to move any faster than normal. And that means 6 to 8 months for briefing and an argument. If under your scenario, they somehow rule, right, on some emergency basis in the next 2 months while the trial's still going on, and they ruled in his favor somehow, it would just take count 1 off the board. The judge is trying counts 2 through 7. He made his findings all about 1. Some of it applies to the remaining, and some people might think, Popok, what are the remaining counts? Okay, here are the remaining counts. And they're all under the same statute, 63-12, but they're standalone counts about different types of fraud. One is insurance fraud, that Donald Trump and his group not only defrauded banks by under collateralizing loans, right, and creating hidden risk for the banks that they didn't know that they were taking on. They thought they had $500 million worth of assets for this $800 million loan when they only had $50 million worth of assets. Insurance fraud, same thing. The insurance companies thought they were insuring a building that had a value of X, and it was really Y. If there had been a calamity or a catastrophe and a building had blown up, they would have had to pay out on a value that the thing wasn't worth. That's insurance fraud. There's business record fraud, which we know from the Stormy Daniels case, the hush money cover-up case, is fraudulent entries in books and records for New York companies is a crime and a fraud. And then finally, there's financial statement fraud, things you put in your personal financial statements, and then conspiracies around each of those 3 things. That's what the judge is trying right now. And then the judge at the end, if he finds on any or all of these counts, is going to have to fashion the remedy. The remedy that the OAG is asking for is disgorgement, calculate how much they made from their fraud and rip it away from them, Judge. That's disgorgement. And then also the dissolution, the monitor. But the really big thing that's left is the ban on Donald Trump transacting business in New York and buying real estate and taking out bank loans for the next 5 years, the permanent banning of his controller and CFO, Weisselberg and McConney, and replacing the trustee over the trust that controls all of his assets with somebody of the OAG's liking. So those are the remedies. So the short answer to or the long answer to your short question is, if they rule against Donald Trump, has no impact. If they rule for Donald Trump, no real impact. I mean, if they give guidance to the trial judge about something that he's been looking at incorrectly, that can apply to the trial that he's currently on before he issues his ruling, great, it'll be a ruling. But they're only looking at, the appeal is narrow. Did the judge make a mistake under the law and under the facts to grant summary judgment on the first count of the pleading for what we call standalone persistent fraud? Yes or no? They're not commenting because it's not on appeal 2 through 7 of the complaint. And so I gave you sort of a glib answer, which is it'll have no impact. It'll have an impact to the media. Oh, Trump reversed this. But to Engoron, he's just going to keep applying the law as he sees fit unless he gets alternate guidance from the trial judge. Now that we've got into the weeds about the appeal, tell me what you've thought about, Karen, in watching the first 2.5 days of Trump in the courtroom, out of the courtroom, the way they've approached the first witness, opening statements, anything from your own trial experience that you think is really interesting to explain this to our listeners and followers. We're all ears.
Yeah. So one really interesting thing is what you just explained, which is, that they started with this interlocutory or intermediate appeal happening during the case. If this was a criminal case, for example, which would normally be in front of a jury, because of course this is a bench trial, which means it's only a judge trial. And there's been a lot of talk about why it's a bench or a judge trial and not a jury trial. But if this was a criminal prosecution and the defense took an Article 78 appeal, or this intermediate step, this interlocutory appeal where you don't appeal after the conviction, you appeal in the middle. As a prosecutor, I would have probably asked to hit pause and not continued with the other counts. The reason is several-fold. Number one, I don't want to try this case twice if it comes back. It's a lot of witnesses, 150, or actually 25 fact witnesses, I think this one they said, right? But it's a lot of witnesses and a lot of tricky witnesses. I wouldn't want to have to call, put my entire case on. And also don't forget criminals beyond a reasonable doubt, not my favorite in the world, preponderance of the evidence, which is a much, much, much lower standard. And so I wouldn't want to create that record. And as a result, I would have pressed pause and not allowed it to have the risk of 2 possible trials. I would want to resolve this interlocutory part first and then do the whole thing one way or another. But so that's why I guess it was so confusing to me, because I just strategically, this is a new thing that for me, I hadn't seen something like this before. But the trial, so it's really interesting. The trial is very, very heated and very fiery, which judge trials or bench trials typically are not. Usually defense attorneys save that for the jury, the outrage, et cetera. Really what all they're doing here is pissing off the judge, and he's signaling that, right? He's saying, I already ruled on that. Like, how many times does he have to say, I've already ruled on that? That's not what this trial is about. Move along, Miss Haba, that kind of thing. They really want to just play to Donald Trump. And it's very clear that that's what they're doing, that they are rehashing and recycling the same old tired arguments that have been rejected over and over again, and grandstanding. And as the judge said, wasting his time rehashing things that have already been decided upon. And all that's going to do is irritate the judge, who is the ultimate fact finder here. So again, makes no sense whatsoever why they're doing that. But I think they're doing that because that's what Trump wants, and they just do whatever he says. And one thing that I found also very interesting in this trial was that he would make these public statements, but on his way in. This is a civil case, which means he was not required to be present. He chose to be present. If you recall, he was not present at his E. Jean Carroll defamation trial. He didn't show up. So why did he show up to this one? And a lot of people are theorizing that it's because, what Trump cares about the most is his money, and that goes to the heart of who he is. And so he really cares about this case. I suppose that's a possible reason why he showed up. I think another possible reason is so that he can use this as a campaign stop, if you will, right? He could go wherever he wants, Iowa, New Hampshire, where he says he's going to go, or where he says he'd rather be, and you wouldn't really have news coverage of those speeches that he's giving. That would be something that you maybe Fox would cover, but nobody else would. But here, every station, all they do is talk about and cover what he says on his way into court and on his way out of court. And, because there's no cameras in this courtroom and it's not audio fed, the public doesn't have any sense of what's going on in the courtroom. They don't know other than what is reported, which is very different than hearing it yourself and seeing it yourself. So when he comes out and says things about what happened, that's what a lot of people are gleaning from what's happening inside the courtroom. And interestingly, there's now a blending of inside and outside the courtroom, because apparently he went out and said that the judge ruled something, and he said it on TV. And then he goes into the courtroom and the judge puts on the record, "I did not say that," and basically called him out and said, "You're a liar, for what you said outside of court." So it's just very interesting to watch what's happening here, and why he's doing what he's doing, and why he's using this as an opportunity to get as much and maximum coverage to get his side of the story out. And the defense that they're trying to shop around in the court of public opinion, not in court, because this won't fly, is that there were no victims here, that the banks made money and they got all their money. The loans got paid back. They made money off of this. I'm a good businessman. So what's the harm? Why is this case being brought? This makes no sense. It's a witch hunt. And that's his defense. His emotional defense. It's not a legal defense, but it's what he's trying to win over hearts and minds in the public, right? And so it made me really think about something you said earlier, Popok, about the difference between theft and fraud. And they're two completely separate concepts in the law, right? And there are statutes, criminal and civil, that cover each of these things, right? And so theft involves the direct physical taking of property or money. It's literally taking something tangible from somebody with the intention of permanently depriving somebody of that property, right? That's what theft is. And he is not charged with theft. He is charged with persistent fraud. And what is fraud, right? Fraud is about manipulation, deception, misrepresentation, right? That's what fraud is. And I think, Popok, you've done an excellent job at really describing why fraud is such a cancer on our economy, on our markets, on our free markets, on just fair business dealing, right? And I think that's the thing that really needs to be hit home and needs to be beat back when he says, "Oh, but they made money." Yeah, but they made money based on false pretenses, right? It's not okay to, pump up the value of a stock based on false information. "Oh, but we all made money." No, that's not the way the markets work, right? And fraud is just the worst. It's our economy, our free society, our free market, our capitalism does not work if fraud is allowed to be one of the elements that allows people to make money. Then suddenly, that's the opposite of what we stand for. And that's what this trial is about, is his fraud. And so I think that is something that the Attorney General's office also has been really doing an excellent job at covering by putting on their witnesses. So far, the accountant, Donald Bender, I think his name is, from the Mazars firm. they're basically, I think he's been on the stand for 3 days, and they're cross-examining him and throwing him under the bus. Well, you're the expert. We relied on you, and, you should have done your job. Why? That's what you made millions of dollars for, was to do these statements of financial condition, but you didn't even do a basic audit. You did, so they're throwing everyone under the bus and not trying to take responsibility.
Let me ask you a question about that. From your trained eye, do you think the putting Don Bender on trial as a way to show lack of intent, because this is a whole fight about, on these counts, about intent. And it sounds odd to those that don't practice the law, but there are certain claims in fraud that you have to prove in order to prevail, whether you're the attorney general or you're just a former business partner who's suing, somebody they used to work with or whatever, you got defrauded. You have there are some requirements that you show that the person intended to do that. It wasn't an accidental fraud. They didn't back into it. And so there's that fight, right? Chris Keiss in his opening for Donald Trump said there was no intent to defraud. And that's why they keep focusing on that, because they're trying to ring the bell for Judge Engoron, who's presiding over the case, to say you might have been able to grant the first one because there is no intent element under New York law for that. But for the rest, you can't show intent. And we're going to go beat up Don Bender because who also testified successfully for the Manhattan DA's office, your old employer, in the tax fraud case that Alvin Bragg successfully brought against Trump Organization and Alan Weisselberg. He testified there. I mean, who better to testify? The guy that's not only spent 12 years doing the Trump org tax returns, he's been doing the tax returns for the kids and for Donald Trump himself and for Alan Weisselberg himself personally. Nobody knows where the bodies are buried more than Donald Bender. But I guess my question, I got a little sidetracked there, is, from your perspective, do you think they're scoring points with Judge Engoron to make this people versus Donald Bender instead of Donald Trump?
No, of course not. And that's, again, why the strategy makes no sense, right? The strategy makes no sense. They're not trying this. They just don't care to try this case in any way that is serious. I mean, they just want to use it as a way to gripe, do their personal gripes and then claim being the victim, and grievances. And that's it. This is not a normal trial with normal lawyers who are thinking strategically about trying to win over the judge, trying to just the real nuances. I mean, there's some issues here that I think they could potentially play with, right? The intent and materiality elements of the remaining counts, that the intent to defraud or the intent to deceive, or were these, some of these lies, were they material to, to the business deal? And that's something that they might be able to have some legs if they tried it seriously, but they're really not trying this seriously. They're using it as a place to grandstand and continue to shop around their gripes.
You know how I know you're right, besides the fact that you're generally right, is I had a case once where in arbitration where the opposing lawyer, who had a really bad reputation, started off his opening statement attacking the arbitrator. He had done his research. He hated this arbitrator from the moment he got selected. And he said, for once in your life, perhaps you'll rule in favor of the plaintiff instead of the defendant, which you've spent your entire life. And I'm thinking, I thought this is either genius or this is insanity. In my head, I had to go next. I'm thinking he's either going to make this guy rule in his favor or hate him forever and not rule in his favor. I wonder which it'll be. And it was what I thought. The arbitrator hated him, did not take kindly to being attacked, felt he had to defend his professional honor at the start. But at the beginning, I was almost a little bit tipping my hat, like this is an interesting strategy. Go after the judge from the opening bell. Well, that's what they're doing here. You got Alina Habba gesticulating and harumphing every time something doesn't go their way. Chris Keiss seems pretty normal. Donald Trump throwing his hands up in the air. So my working theory, I want to get your opinion on this as always. My working theory is that they he's like Donald Trump once again here anyway, is like a riverboat gambler with nothing to lose. He knows he's not going to win this trial. He knows, if he didn't know it before Tuesday last week when the judge ruled against him, he certainly knows it now. And he probably knows the appellate court's not going to be any better for him. And so he's getting in his shots. He's like, you know what? I paid the price of admission. It's like when you go to a movie and all you want to do is throw popcorn at the screen and yell and scream instead of watching the movie. That's where Donald Trump is. He's just throwing popcorn at the screen, yelling and screaming because he knows nothing he's going to say or do is going to change Judge Engoron's mind based on the facts and the law that he committed persistent fraud and his entire empire was based on a lie and a series of lies consistently given over and over again. And if you're going to do that, if you know you've lost, then you hold press conferences at every turn. You come back late to the court. You show your disdain for the judge in a way that I've never seen a defendant quite do that, because you're going to lose anyway. And you might as well get your punches in while you can for your, like you said, your political audience. Is that why he's acting out and his lawyers are acting out? I mean, what do you think?
Honestly, I think you're giving them too much credit. I don't think they're that smart. I just don't, because then that would, yeah. I think they're just, they're just, I don't know. It's hard to understand how they think. Part of me was wondering, is Donald Trump is the only reason he's showing up trying to get out of being deposed by Michael Cohen's lawyer, right? He was supposed to sit for a deposition on Tuesday, and he said, "Well, I can't possibly sit for the deposition because I have to be I have to be here in court." So, I think that's as much of a possibility as anything else.
Right. But that's going forward on the 10th or the 9th or the 10th. But
yeah.
Look, I think it's what we've all said. He knew the media trucks were going to be all out in front of 60 Center Street. He had a captive audience, literally. He steps into the courtroom, flash of cameras, microphones. That's his favorite place to be. And he gets to do all the bashing, knowing there's nothing to lose, because he's not going to, I hate to be spoiler alert, tell you what happens at the end of this trial. He is not winning this trial. He may prevail on one or two counts. I doubt even that. Judge Engoron, yeah.
I have a prediction.
Yeah, okay.
I think because Judge Engoron has been attacked and accused so many times of being biased and making his mind up ahead of time and not listening to the arguments, I think he's going to throw them one count. I think there's going to be one count at least that Engoron,
like insurance fraud. That would be the one I'd probably
whatever it is. Just say, maybe. You know what? I didn't, and it'll show that because that way it'll show, and the appellate courts will say he didn't just go all the way for the attorney general. He was thoughtful.
It'll insulate him from the appellate. Yeah. From the appellate review. No, I agree with that. There's a vicious rumor out there that Judge Engoron knows about our show. So welcome if that's true. We hope that we started pronouncing your name right a long time ago, which is a good thing. So, that was the first 3 days, Don Bender wrap up. I agree with you. I think the trial of Don Bender is not going well for Donald Trump. I don't think that is moving the needle one iota with Judge Engoron about the issues that are in play and that he needs to focus on for the Trump fraud. I almost said crimes because they are crimes too. The Trump fraud and the preponderance of evidence standard that the New York Attorney General needs to meet, which is just slightly more likely than not that these things happened. And you can't look at these records. And maybe there's a couple in there that they pinned on Don Bender, officially. Like, oh, well, why didn't you catch the size? I love this one. Well, why didn't you catch that the size of the apartment was wrong? He's like, I don't know. It was a mistake by the Trump organization, and we didn't catch it. But, we didn't think they were. I don't know.
I'd never been inside there before.
Right. Well, Bender might have been, because Bender's been around a long while. That's why that's why the temperature went up. And I have a comment as a trial lawyer like you about what's going on with Donald Trump. The temperature went way up in the room. Eric Trump, who's a nail biter, go look it up, was biting his nails so much that the press commented on it, while his accountant, Don Bender, was ripping down the family, with all the charts and graphs and this kind of methodical. It can be mind-numbing to the uninitiated, but to a trial judge that's trying to get to the bottom of financial fraud, he's hanging on every word. Sometimes juries fall asleep during these kind of, let's go to check number 101. Let's go. What's on the endorsement of that check? And you're like, you look over at your jury and they're like, you can tell they're sleeping with their eyes open. But a Judge Engoron, who's, let's be frank, he's kind of eaten up the media attention. He smiled for the camera to start the trial, took off his glasses and looked over at the panel of photographers. He's hanging on every word. And so, but I have, and I'm not this is just my armchair analysis, doing this for 32 years. Donald Trump is having to sit and actually watch evidence be presented against him, watch an opening statement, watch methodically a skilled attorney general, Mr. Willis, who's doing it for Letitia James, walk through evidence and have to actually sit and listen. You can see him at his breaks. It's taking something out of him. He looks, if we lined up video from him a month ago and him at these breaks, he's flagging. It looks like they're getting their pound of flesh out of him, because it's one thing to miss the E. Jean Carroll case where you're being accused and eventually found to be a rapist, and just do it from a Scottish golf course or bunker and attack everything, because you're getting these reports by lawyers who are afraid of you, your own lawyers, and are afraid to speak truth to power. All right. And you're not getting the full report. It's quite another thing to sit in a courtroom and have the case presented against you, knowing that your fate is in the hands of somebody else, somebody who you don't like and you don't trust, about all of your business operation. He's just turned the keys of his entire business empire over to Judge Arthur Engoron. I mean, and that is something that I think is eventually, that's why I don't think I was surprised to learn right before we went on the air that Trump hightailed it back down to Florida. And I don't think, as I said on another hot take of mine, if we see him at 3 or 4 more occasions that, you have a speculation as to when he might show up again. If we see him in 10 out of the 100 days of trial, I'd be surprised. All right. Like I said, you can read it. You can hear about it. You can even be a hot take connoisseur here on the MeidasTouch Network. But there's nothing like Legal AF with Ben, Mycelis, and me, Karen and me, all 3 of us, some combination of us, drilling in using our collective 75 years of experience to explain to you what's going on in real time. We kind of catch it, we examine it, we explode it, we put it back together right in front of you during a show that we call Legal AF. It's only on the MeidasTouch Network. You know that. You're watching me here right now. And when you're not catching our individual hot takes about minute-by-minute developments at the intersection of law, politics, and justice, watch us on our full-length podcast on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and then audio podcast platforms right after that, also on the YouTube channel. So, Popok After Dark, until our next Legal AF, until my next hot take, this is Michael Popok, Legal AF.
Hey Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.